Welcome to Lynn's Warriors. We're taking a hard look at something that affects every family in this country, the education system. Entrust it with our children's futures. I pause when I say that because you are going to hear so much today about things you can't even suspect or guess, but it's going to be a loaded interview. What happens when billions of dollars are poured into schools and the education system and nothing improves? Why is everything getting worse? What happens when the system meant to lift children up and educate them begins to fail and nothing is ever getting any better? Well, we are joined by investigative journalist Chris Papst today, whose work has exposed what he calls a failure factory inside Maryland's public school system. His reporting raises serious questions, not just about one state, but about a pattern that may be repeating across the nation. We think it is repeating across the nation. Chris is going to be explaining all of this because this is not just about test scores, kids going to school every day. This is a lot deeper. This is about opportunity, accountability, and whether we are truly protecting our kids, our next generation, our future American adults and leaders. Chris Papst is an award-winning investigative journalist with Fox 45 News in Baltimore, where he leads Project Baltimore initiative. Since 2017, he has focused on holding, very important, public school systems accountable. Since 2017, that's so many years of digging into this. He's examining funding, performance, and transparency over all these years. He is the author of the newest bestseller, Failure Factory: How Baltimore City Public Schools Deprive Taxpayers and Students of a Future. A deeply researched book. Like I said, 2017, it's been years. He's looking into systemic failures within one of the most heavily funded school districts in the country. He works seriously, and his that didn't even come out right, Chris. I mean, I'm just so overtaken by this whole subject that you spent since 2017, your commitment, your dedication, your drive to educate us about all of this. I can barely get the words out, so I think we should just get right to it. It's chrispapst.com. Again, all the information about Chris will be in the body of the video, but I am going to say welcome, Chris, back to the Warriors.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, of course, I want to stay on this subject as long as you'll have me, Chris, and talk about this. I think is such an urgent issue that is hard to get to kind of the top with everything going on in our country right now, but so necessary. I know you recently wrote an op-ed. First, tell us about that a little bit.
So what I'm trying to do is, as you've mentioned, since 2017, we started doing this. So for 9 years, every single day of my professional life, I've been devoted to investigating public education. And the reason that we're doing this is because I don't think that there's another issue in America that is more important. And I don't say that just because that's what we happen to be doing. But if you look at everything in this country, from crime rates, incarceration rates, home values, taxes, everything goes back to public education. If you live in a good public school system, your home values are going to be higher. If you live in a school system that is providing better education for the kids, your economy is going to be better because the kids are going to be better coming out of the school to go into the workforce. If you have a school system that's providing a better education, we know that the number of people that are incarcerated, that are undereducated, is overwhelming. And it makes sense. Why are they committing crimes? Because they can't get good jobs. It all goes back to your public education system. And what we've seen in Maryland is that Maryland, for many, many years, has had an extremely expensive but very low performing public school system. And we can see the ramifications of that. Baltimore is a really tough place to be. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that are listening to us right now, and I don't think any of them are scheduling vacations for West Baltimore. They're not scheduling vacations in East or South Baltimore. They should be. The architecture there, the history there, the inner harbor with the Chesapeake Bay, Baltimore should be a thriving city right in the middle of Philadelphia, New York, and Washington, D.C. Why is it not a thriving city? Because the public education system is not producing people that are capable of getting good jobs when they leave. And we know that. That's not my opinion. We can see that in the statistics. So I wrote the article, the op-ed for the Washington Times, because I believe in this topic, and I believe that public education can improve. I don't even think it's that hard. I think that there's just a few things that could be done that could make a significant impact. And there's a couple other things that might be a little bit more difficult, but there's very simple things that you can start with that could make public schools better. But it's not happening because, and the point that I make in Failure Factory is there's so much money that is now going into public schools. The people that are getting that money have shown little to no interest in disrupting the status quo, because that status quo makes them a lot of money. And what we need to do as citizens, as parents, as taxpayers, is that we need to take control, and we need to show the people that are running the school systems that it's not their school system, it's our school system. And we have to change how the school systems are operated. Again, not drastic changes. It doesn't have to be drastic. They can be fairly minor changes that would have a huge impact.
You know, Chris, last time we spoke, maybe about a month ago, I really want to keep focusing on this. I think education across our country, the most important thing with kids, we know, K through 12 really failing in all areas across the country. But what stuck in my mind is when you gave me that fact, right, from your research about, I don't refresh me, all the millions for additional employees
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh, does that mean like teachers, aides, and like librarians and all that? And you're like, no, employees. Tell us a little bit about that, because, I think people, just like I thought, oh, employees, that means teachers. That's going to be great for kids. And it's not, right? That's not what we're talking about.
So one thing that we talked about in the first time that I came on was this idea that public education is no longer prioritizing the education of students, it's prioritizing the acquisition of funding. And then the usage of that funding to hire adults that grows the political power and influence of public education. Okay, that's what we're seeing. And I think that the 9 years that I've been doing this and what we point out in Failure Factory, I'm taking you through the data and I'm showing you why and how that is happening. So we have new data that's constantly coming out. And since the last time I've been on your show, we have the most recent data that has come out. So we can go over that real quickly. So from 2017, when we started Project Baltimore, when this book begins, when Failure Factory begins, until just a couple of months ago, the most recent data, that would be the 2025 data. We can see the Baltimore City Schools has gotten a $500 million funding increase. The school system has gone from $1.3 billion to $1.8 billion. $500 million a year in increase. That's a 38% increase in funding, as the enrollment of the school system's gone down about 7%. So you have a lot more money going into a smaller school system. So what is the school system doing with the additional $500 million? Well, you just have to follow the money to see where the priorities are. A lot of that money is going to salary increases for the people that work in the school system. Okay, student outcomes are going down. Student outcomes are falling, but the people that work in the school system are getting raises. With the rest of the money, over those 8 years, the school system has hired 1,700 additional employees. So the school system in 2017 had 10,500 employees. Now it has over 12,000, about 12,200 employees. So they've increased 1,700 employees. Okay. Meanwhile, again, the enrollment's going down. But out of those 1,700 employees, 200 are teachers. So if you're a school system and your priority is to educate kids, and you get $500 million and hire 1,700 people, and you only hire 200 teachers, meaning you hired 1,500 people to work in that school system, many of which are administrative level, but you don't hire teachers. The money isn't getting to the classroom. It's getting tied up in the bureaucratic state. And the reason that's happening is because you're having a growing number of people that are working in the administration of these public school systems that are all making very good six-figure salaries. They're making a lot of money. They have good pensions. They have good health care. Many of them have summers off. They don't want to give that up. They want more people in those systems. All right. And again, not my opinion, just look at the data all right there. as the student outcomes are falling, the adults that are working in the school system, not only are there more adults, but they're making a lot more money.
Chris, I don't even know what to say. What are these 1,500, you said administrators? What are, obviously not administrating correctly, because look at the failure of all of this. We're right away, you're just telling me this, like I can, and I'm not an expert. This to me is criminal. So where is that outrage? You know, where are the elected officials? Are the parents beaten down, don't know what's going on, just don't step up? They've given up. You said the enrollment dropped. I guess that's because people are moving out of Baltimore, right? Or also kids are dropping out of schools. I get this, but what's going on here? Because to me, it's such a big red flag, and you don't have to be, a scientist to figure this out for a layperson like myself. So where is this outrage about this? Because I'm outraged, and I don't even live there.
Sure. Well, the outrage is from people that are outside of Baltimore. And that's one of the big problems, is that the elected officials inside Baltimore are not outraged. In fact, they like their school system, and it's their school system. Now, the people that are affected, the everyday people, the people that I talk to in Failure Factory, the kids that are in the school system, their parents that are in the school system, they care, they're outraged. But remember, Baltimore is a struggling city. 20 to 25% of the people in this city live in poverty. The child poverty rate in Baltimore is near 30%. Almost 1 in 3 kids are living in poverty. Now, if you're that family and you're trying to go up against a $1.8 billion school system, you're going to get stomped. And that is what we're hearing from parents when we go and talk to them that have an issue with the school system. A lot of these people are living in poverty, Lynn. They don't have the resources to be able to fight back. The school system has $1.8 billion in resources to fight back, and they crush them. And a lot of the parents feel defeated. They feel like the school system doesn't care. And you can't blame them when you hear a lot of the stories that are in Failure Factory of what parents and kids are going through. You can understand why they feel this way, but it has been this way for a long time. But you have the politicians that are in the city are not speaking out against it. They're not saying the school system needs to be held accountable for the massive amount of money that's going into it and the low outcomes that the students are getting. And the data here is so remarkable. So let me go over just a couple things quickly, just because it's really hard to wrap your head around the degree to which there is a failure factory here. So we already talked about there's a 38% increase in funding over 8 years from 2017 to 2025. 38% increase in funding. The graduation rate's up 1%. It went from 70 to 71%, by far the lowest in the state. Math proficiencies went up 1%, from 11% to 12%. So a 38% funding increase led to a 1% increase in math proficiencies. And what you have here is you have 88% of the kids in Baltimore City schools are not proficient in math. 12% of these kids are proficient in math, but Lynn, 71% of them are graduating. These kids don't have the skills that they need when they graduate high school. It's simply not there. And it really is going to take the people of the city to say, we are not going to stand for this anymore. If we're going to give this school system $1.8 billion, we need to demand better outcomes. And I'll give you one more data point here that is really alarming. The dropout rate in Baltimore City is at a record high. It's 20.8%.
Wow.
Now, in 2017, the dropout rate was 12%. So think of these are kids that are dropping out of high school. It went from 12% to 20.8% with a 38% funding increase, 1,700 additional employees working for the school system, and there's fewer students enrolled. So you have more money, more employees, fewer students, and you have record dropout rates. What are these additional employees doing? You look at this data and it's frustrating and it's hard. And what makes it harder for me, and this will be my last point here, is that when I go into people's homes and I talk to them, they all want the same thing for their kids. They want something better. And it doesn't matter who you are, rich or poor. You want your kids to live a better life than you did. Except when you're rich, you have the resources to be able to control that. And when you're poor, you don't. And going into people's houses and just looking in their eyes and hearing their stories about how they hope the next generation will be the one that gets out of poverty, but yet we're producing 12% of kids that are proficient in math. It's sad.
Yeah, it's such a vicious cycle and so unbelievable in 2026 that we're even talking about this. But thank goodness, Chris, you did this research. I mean, this is something, not a year of research, 2 years of research, years of research. I don't know how you do it, seeing things just getting worse and worse and worse. I know you mentioned to me at one point you were in Washington, right? Do you want to talk about that at all? Because I would, you don't have to, but whatever you want to talk about. But to me, this is so criminal, right? To just not service, our American people, our kids, especially the vulnerable cities like Baltimore. I mean, what do we expect then from these children, right? They're dropping out, they're getting involved perhaps in crime, right? Like, what was the reception there, if you want to talk about it?
Sure. So I was invited to the White House, I think it was January, and there was a roundtable. There was a roundtable discussion that was being held, and there was a school choice week. And I'm not an advocate. I'm a journalist who wrote a book, but they asked me to come and speak at the school choice week roundtable. And Secretary Linda McMahon was there. Some director level people from the White House were there. And it was really simply a conversation about how can we improve public schools? What are some ideas that we can have to improve public schools? And when people talk about school choice, they talk about parents being able to have the ability to move their kids to a school for which they're not zoned. And there are some states like Arizona or Florida that provide vouchers for parents that they can get money. The money that would go to a school, they can get that money and they can use it for homeschooling. They can use it for private school, parochial school, Catholic school, whatever it may be. Maryland doesn't have those options. And Maryland is a state that has extremely few options when it comes to school choice, unless you have the means to pay for it. And so when I went there and I had spoken, there's probably about 75 people in the room. I mentioned a lot of the things that we're talking about here, Lynn, just about the amount of money going into it and the lack of outcomes that are coming out of it for the kids. But one thing that I did mention that I think was something that really struck me when we figured this out was what a lack of school choice tends to do is segregate kids in schools. 2 years ago, we had looked into Title I schools. And what Title I schools are is schools with high concentrations of poverty. And as we were looking into this, we found 98 schools in the state of Maryland. There's 1,400 schools in the state of Maryland, 1,400 public schools. 98 of them had 100% of the kids living in poverty. Every single student enrolled in 98 schools was living in poverty. And that is really what a lack of school choice does, because those 98 schools with 100% of those kids, their parents can't get out. They can't move. They don't have the money. They don't have the means, the resources. They can't pay a tuition at a private school or a Catholic school. And there's also, they're segregated. You have, try to really wrap your head around that. You have 98 schools where every single kid lives in poverty.
Thousands of kids and families. It's thousands.
Thousands of kids and families, all of them in the same exact boat. And what's interesting to me is that in places like Maryland, they preach diversity. But what a lack of school choice tends to do is homogenize where people are living and the schools that they're attending. It's a complete lack of diversity, but that's what we're seeing.
Let me ask you something, Chris. Is there any follow-up to this? Is this because we know Maryland is not an isolated case, if we want to call this a
No,
case, right? I mean, to me, this is a national tragedy and a crisis. I keep adding words to what this is, and there's no follow up as we're going to change this immediately, or we're going to hold those elected officials, responsible if they don't start stepping up and get in there and change things around. Because to me, this can only keep escalating, right? If they got away with, 1,700 new employees, mostly administrative, they're going to keep going when there's no accountability.
sure. And that's why I wrote this book, because we can't have more Baltimores. We have to make sure that our public schools are being held accountable. Now, in most cases, people live in areas where there is a check and a balance. In Baltimore and in Maryland, there's not. This is a one-party rule state, a one-party rule city. And it's not to say that, Republicans are coming in on their unicorns and saving the day, but it is to say that two-party control certainly is better than one-party rule. And what we're seeing here is that when you have this one-party rule mentality, there's no checks and balances on anything. Everybody celebrates everybody no matter what, and there's no there's simply no accountability for the actions that are taken, because if you hold somebody accountable, you're essentially holding your own political party accountable. And if you want to grow in your political party, that's not the way to do it. So I wrote this book because I do want people throughout the rest of the country to understand what to look for. And as part of Failure Factory, I have a chapter in there where I show people things to look for in your school system that are indicative of problems in your school system that you might not know about.
Right.
And a lot of what schools do is they manipulate the data, and they make it intentionally difficult for parents to know what's going on, because you're working 40, 50 hours a week. You're raising your kids. You're trying to plan vacations and walk the dog. Like, you don't have time like me to sit in front of a computer for 6 or 7 hours and try to figure out some algorithm on an Excel spreadsheet. Like, that's what I do for a living. So in writing this book, what I'm trying to do is give people the information they need to easily look things up so that they can tell if their school system is going down the path of a Baltimore City. And I can tell you now that a lot of school systems are, because they're very concerned about their data. They want their data to look good. And the easiest way to make the data look good is to lower academic standards and then manipulate that data. But there are ways to catch it. And I hope if people pick up a copy of Failure Factory, they can see how you can catch that stuff and get a better understanding of how your school is actually performing.
Yeah. One of our goals, Chris, at the Warriors is I want a copy of this book in every library across the United States. I really think that everybody has to get on board with this. And you pointed out so rightfully, people don't have the time, right, to be doing this research, to be looking into, they think they send their kids to school and it's okay for 6, 7 hours a day. They come home, right? But so much criminality is happening here. Let me ask you, so then a parent now, what do you want them to do other than you're sounding the alarm, right? You're giving them tools. They're going to look at the book. Then what do they do? Because in a place like Baltimore, if you're telling me that the elected officials they're not doing anything, what's a parent to do other than leave the place, which of course just contributes to all of this continued failure? What can they do when they're so vulnerable, so poor, in poverty? They're stuck. How can we unstick them? We've got to start somewhere. And
Well, where you start is, so I know that I do this with my kids, and my kids are in public school, so I'm just not somebody reporting on this. I'm living it. And I think that does separate me also in a way as a journalist, and I'm not just reporting on this stuff. My kids are directly involved in this. And one of the things that we do, my wife and I do, is we're in the school a lot. Be there. Make sure the principal knows who you are. Make sure the teacher knows who you are. Contact your legislators. Put some pressure on them. Legislators don't like to be contacted by people. This is a dirty little secret that a lot of people don't talk about. Legislators do not like hearing from their constituents because it's work. And they don't want to hear from you. And that's why a lot of times when there's a proactive stance politically, everyone's like, call your legislator, call your legislator, call your legislator, because they don't want to hear from you, because they don't want you to call them. They want to have their cushy jobs making a lot of money. So call your legislator, let them know that you want the schools held accountable. And when it comes time to vote, do your homework, especially with your local races. Pay very close attention to your local races. Your local school board, like we talked about in the beginning of your show here, Lynn, your local school system has a significant impact on your life, from your home values to taxes to crime to your economy. When you have a chance to vote for school board, make sure you take a couple minutes and find the person who's going to hold the school system accountable. Someone who's not just going to give the school system your money, someone who's going to say, hey, if I'm going to give you a 38% increase over 8 years, you better give the taxpayers a better educated kid. And if you don't do that, you're going to be fired. The principal is going to be fired. The assistant principals are going to be fired. We're going to bring in new teachers. We're not going to tolerate this. And that's what you're seeing in Baltimore. The reason it's happening is that it's tolerated, and we can't tolerate it if we want it to change.
You know, Chris, after we spoke the first time, several people reached out to me to tell me things about their school districts or their schools. Do you want to hear from these people? What they have to say? Because I'll tell you, and these are people who don't know each other. More than a handful, I will say, told me that now again, they're telling me this. I don't have the proof, but they were telling me that they know for a fact that their school districts are going in and manipulating the books, so to speak, with the grading and all of that, definitely for more funding. So this is something that's systemic and is growing. It's probably in all 50 states, right? It's become a business education funding.
I mean, it's so much a business that the leader of Baltimore City Public Schools is not a superintendent; it's a CEO. Like that's her actual title is a CEO. And I know that's happening because I cover it in Maryland, and it's not in Baltimore City; it's Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, Harford County. It's the school systems around Baltimore. What you're talking about with the manipulation of data, whether that be suspension data, violence data, weapons data, grading data, the schools are manipulating a lot of that. One, because unless you have somebody like me in your area, it's pretty easy to get away with, because you need to have people that are looking very closely at the data so that they can spot an outlier. They can spot something that is inconsistent, because it's easy to fudge the numbers. And it's also very easy to change grades. And of the 8 years that Failure Factory covers, 5 of those years is a massive grade changing scheme that we were able to uncover in Baltimore City Public Schools, where thousands and thousands of kids were having their failing grades changed to passing, simply to be able to matriculate the kids through the grading so that they can eventually graduate them. Now, 2 questions there. That is exactly how you get 71% graduation rates with 12% math proficiencies, because the schools are pushing the kids along without giving them the education they need, and they're just changing their grades. Like, we know that it's happening. All right, just read the book and everything's right there. It's all right in front of you. And the other thing is, why would they do that? Well, because they get more money. Because the education funding, a school gets funding not to educate a child. That's not true. They don't get money to educate a child. They get money to enroll a child. The incentive is to enroll the child, not educate them, which is why many teachers that we talk to in Failure Factory say the focus of the school system is to promote students. In other words, push them to the next grade, not educate them, because the school doesn't get money to educate the kid. They get money to enroll them. And if a student continues to matriculate through the grades, they're more likely to stay enrolled, because they're more likely to think they're going to end up getting a diploma. And if they stay enrolled, the schools keep the money coming in. If you're a principal, if you're a teacher, if 100% of your kids are proficient in math, or 0% of your kids are proficient in math, you get the same amount of money. Same amount of money. It all depends on if the kid is enrolled. That's it.
Now, correct me, Chris, if I'm wrong, but did you tell me last time we spoke that, so a child's enrolled, for instance, and what if they never come to school again? Are they still considered enrolled and nobody's checking on them? Or Did I get that
So
wrong? Did I imagine that?
no, 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 no.
Because
That is a real thing
I'm
in
having
Maryland.
nightmares about all this.
So in Maryland, the way that enrollment works, and many states are like this, is that enrollment is taken on one day a year. And that one day is September 30th. If a school can enroll a student on September 30th, under Maryland law, that student never has to come to school again for the rest of the year. And the school will get 100% of the funding for that child. Now, in Maryland right now, in Baltimore City, every child enrolled, the school system gets about $24,000 to $25,000 per kid. So if you're a principal and you can enroll a student on September 30th, just enroll them, get them on paper, you will get $25,000 roughly for your school. And under Maryland law, that kid never has to come to school again, never has to take a test, never has to do anything, and you will get the money. In Failure Factory, I found a kid who was in jail and somebody was enrolling him in a school. Somebody at the school was enrolling him, not his parents, not him. Somebody at a school was enrolling him as he was in jail. So now you have taxpayers that are paying to keep somebody in jail and school to educate somebody who isn't there. But that's the system that has created. So the next question is, well, why has it been created that way? It doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense. Well, it's because of what we talked about before, Lynn. The focus is not educating kids. The focus is acquiring funding and then using that funding to hire more adults that work in the school system. And I think that the reason that I wrote Failure Factory is because in 2017, when I first got here, I did not believe that. I didn't believe it at all. I rejected that concept outright. But everything that we're talking about here, about how schools are funded, how they don't have to educate kids, and then what the outcomes are after a $500 million funding increase, now how can you come to any other conclusion?
Yeah. I also saw a tweet, and Chris, I wanted to retweet it. I have to go back and look at it. Something you put out, it was like X amount of dollars spent per pupil in Baltimore. It was something like that. And like X amount spent in other places. You put some kind of tweet, and it was so much money, just like for Maryland or Baltimore.
That was Miami.
Compared to like other places. Just give me a little refresher on that, because I do want to go back and retweet that. That was it. That caught my eye. Could have been early this morning. So I want to share that about the money, because I think people understand the money part. If they understand nothing, they'll look at the money and they'll be like, oh, I get it. You know,
there's a couple states that have really taken a different path in education than Maryland has. And most of them are in the South, and also happens to be where a lot of people are moving to. And it also happens to be where you're seeing a lot of the increases in educational outcomes for students are in the South. Mississippi has been the main example where, when I was a kid, Mississippi was, made fun of. And now Mississippi's beating Maryland in standardized testing, federal standardized testing. Well, how did that happen? Well, it happened because they bucked the status quo and they started doing things differently. And that's what I was saying in the beginning of your show, that there's answers that are out there.
Yeah.
It's just being able to convince the politicians to be able to change the status quo when there's a lot of money being made. And that's the thing. There's so much money being made that the people that are making it don't want to change the system. But if you look at states like Florida and Arizona, they're going heavily into a more voucher system, a school choice system, where parents can choose where they want to send their kids. And the tweet that you're talking about was from Miami. And Miami's public education system is without a doubt higher achieving than Baltimore. Miami outperforms Baltimore in every federal statistic that is kept from education. And this is the National Assessment for Educational Progress. And Miami spends about $13,000 per student, and Maryland is spending about $23,000 per student. This is last year's data because it lags. So you're talking about 13,000 to 23,000, and the 13,000 is getting better results. Now, most people would say, wow, okay, well, why don't we adopt the concept of the $13,000 a student approach, because that's producing better student outcomes. But that's not going to happen.
Let me ask you two things to finish up.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, again, I'm a broken record, Chris, that this is a national crisis, right? It's so
Hmm.
plain to see. I don't know how anybody could fight this, argue against this. This is like, to me, organized crime. I come from New York, like a cartel almost, organized crime. What's going on here? Um, Again, not only in Maryland, where you are, but across our nation, right? Do you think the federal government has to step in now and do something? I don't want to get into states' rules and laws and all that, but obviously they're getting their money, right? Monies. And look what's happening to our future generation of kids. They're not going to be fully formed adults. They're not going to be able to, have jobs. They're not going to be able to do anything at the rate this is going. What are you have any thoughts on that?
In mid-December, I interviewed Secretary Linda McMahon,
Mm-hmm.
the Secretary of the Department of Education, and I asked her this question. And the Trump administration, they're making a heavy push towards dismantling the Department of Education and giving control of education back to the states and the local municipalities. And I asked her, what do you do with a place like
Yeah.
Baltimore, place like Milwaukee, Cleveland, these school systems that have for decades shown that they can't operate themselves in an efficient way to properly educate kids.
Right.
You want to give more power locally to them? And her answer was this. She goes, Chris, the Department of Education does not approve curriculum for schools. We don't hire teachers. We don't hire principals. We don't hire school board members. We already have a very minimal connection to local education. She's like, all we do is create bureaucracy and paperwork that mucks the gears at the local level. And she said to me, and this is part of the reason that I had brought this up earlier in your program, that if there's going to be a push to improve public education, it has to come from the people who live in that community.
Yeah.
If it doesn't come from those people, her argument was it's not going to happen. And I think that in looking at places like Baltimore and my book, I think she's right, because it hasn't happened. But you look at places like Miami, you look at places like Arizona, where the people that are living in those areas are saying, you know what, we're not going to allow this to continue to happen for the next generation. We're going to try something different. Mississippi is the perfect example. We're going to try something different. And they try it, and it's working. And she's right. I think Secretary McMahon is right. It's got to come from the people who are living in that community.
Yeah, who have the investment in that community, have children, have homes. I think she is right. I also think maybe in a place like Baltimore, we have to encourage maybe parent advocacy groups, right? Because there's power in numbers. Try to get parents in neighborhoods to come together. Anything. I just think, Chris, we live in a new environment, like a new country, a new world, 2026. It's not ever like it used to be, right? Because people say to me all the time, well, I used to play in the backyard, or I used to, none of this works anymore. This is like a whole new environment we're in. People have to really step up, take some responsibility. We know everybody's overwhelmed and busy, but this is all about our precious kids, right? And home values and our cities and our towns. Finish us up. Leave us with something you want everybody, besides buying your book, which will have a link in the body of the video to this. What do you want everybody to know about all of this? If they could think about one or two things, what do you want to tell them?
I don't want you to be pessimistic.
Right.
Like I want you to be optimistic, because I what I'm doing here is I'm simply showing you the problem, because you can't fix a problem until you recognize the problem. So here's the problem right here. The problem is what you're going to read in Failure Factory. Now that we know the problem, we can solve the problem, and we can. And it's happening. There's examples of it happening. I even have examples in the book of schools in Baltimore that are showing really good success. There are principals that are doing things just a little bit differently that are showing significant success. But the problem is that we're trapped in this cookie cutter status quo approach to public education that people don't want to deviate from. Again, just got to follow the money. They don't want a chance giving up their money. Yeah. But there are examples where it works. It's not that hard. There's not that many changes that would have to take place. You just need the will of the elected officials to force the school systems to do it. And the reason that's important is because the elected officials are giving the school system the money. That's where the money, you give your money to your elected official and then they distribute it to the school system. So it largely has to come from them. And then it just has to come from us. It's us fighting for it, understanding what the problem is, and then fixing it.
I mean, absolutely. We know what it is. Now let's fix it, but everybody has to step up. Well, Chris Papst, thank you for always shining a light, because we at the Warriors believe, as you just pointed out, raising awareness, pointing it out. There are solutions. Let's get busy, everybody. Thank you for your work, always, your persistence, your dedication. We've got to make a documentary about this. We've got to make, people are visual, Chris. They will watch something. We have to sound the alarm, raise the awareness, get people busy. I want to say you are indeed a warrior, and thank you for joining me again. Let's keep on this. Promise me you'll come back. We have to keep talking about this. I am convinced you just don't talk about it once it goes away. You got to keep talking and talking and talking about something. I believe people have the attention span of a gnat, not their problem, a lot going on, but this is critical and crucial to the state of America and the future of our precious kids. So promise me you'll come back and we're going to do this again.
Absolutely. So the midterms are coming up. One of the biggest issues is going to be public education, especially with the big, beautiful bill and the voucher system, the private voucher system, the scholarship system that it creates. So public education is going to be something heavily discussed in the coming months.
Then definitely we're talking about it. But I'll talk to you before even then, because I'm committed to, again, like I said, getting this book into every library across America. I'm working on that. So we'll discuss that. Chris, thanks for all you do. We will definitely speak again soon.
Thank you.